Effective presenting with think, feel, do. So I'm going to start by just highlighting why we want to be engaging, why we're using storytelling, why we're using visualization. It's not because we want people to love our presentations, it's because we want to cause some action. All of these things, the engagement, the storytelling, the visualization, are means towards an end. And the end is something I'm going to call the do. And we're going to link together the think, which relates to the data, the processing, the analysis, the feel, which is a communication process, in order to achieve a do at the end of the process. So what do I mean by do? Well, there are lots and lots of possible do's. We could mean launch the product. We could mean choose option A. I might be telling a hotel chain to address customer dissatisfaction with a check-in. Sometimes the do is actually just do more research. Sometimes, regrettably, it means cancel the project. And lots of times the do is carry on doing exactly what you are doing. So how do we find the do? Well, the do is the intersection, first of all, of the business question, secondly, of the business context, and thirdly, the data and analysis that we've added to the process. We overlay all three of these, and that will identify the do. Now, we want people to do something after they receive the presentation, the report, the debrief. But actually changing behaviour is really hard. This is a photograph from just outside of an apartment I was staying in Tokyo. And what we can see here is a cone and some barriers, and on the cone in Japanese it says no bicycle parking, and we can see that it's not working. And I kind of imagine the local government official who's looking at this thinking, maybe they're not Japanese people, they don't understand the message, so I'll put it in English, no bicycle parking. And still we have bicycles parked there. So he thinks maybe they can't read English, so he puts a picture of a bicycle with a red line through it. Still, people don't understand they can't park their bicycle there, so he thinks maybe they don't notice this cone, so I'll put a blue flag on the side of the cone saying no bicycle parking. And he is trying to address the problem people do not understand that they can't park their bicycles here. But actually he needs to address the problem that people feel they can park their bicycles here. It's a very different picture. He needs to change the situation so people do not feel it's okay to park here. He's thinking it's a communication problem in terms of, do people understand the message? Yes, people understand the message. Do they see it? Many of them will see it, but they don't feel that it applies. So when we talk about changing behaviour, we often think about behavioural economics and System 1 and System 2. So we're going to inform the rider. That's the think part of the process. But we need to motivate the elephant. We've got to motivate System 1 to make it move in the right direction. And we've got to shape the path so it's easier to move in the right direction. So the think. It starts with the business question. We add in the business context. We pull the data and the analysis together. So this is all of the qualitative and the quantitative information, the analysis skills, and between these three, the think will generate a do. When we look at the data, when we look at the information, when we look at the business question, we arrive at something that we think the client, the stakeholder, should do. But if we look at this triangle here, we can see there's a missing piece. The do is defined by the think, but the think will not necessarily cause the do to happen. We need the emotional level, the feel. So because we're researchers, we still think that think is really important. They're the platform that everything is built on, and afterwards we can go back and we can look and say, now why did we come to that recommendation? That is all based on the think. The feel comes back to this point that people very rarely change their beliefs or behavior because of facts. Change happens at the emotional level. And the do. Every story should be aimed at creating an outcome, an action that the teller wants the recipient to do. You cannot do a good presentation. You cannot write a good report unless you know what it is that the reader should do afterwards. And you should be advocating for that do to happen. So here's an example from a wonderful book by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick. And this is looking at popcorn in the United States. And this is a medium-sized bag of popcorn. And they did this study back in 1994, and they found that a medium bag of popcorn got 37 grams of saturated fat. At that time, the recommended maximum was 20 grams. So they could produce a chart, and that would have probably almost no impact, might not even be covered by the media. So they called a press conference, and they put on the table a medium-sized bag of popcorn, and they said, this has got 37 grams of fat. And there was a cloth on the other part of the table, and they removed the cloth and said, that's the same as a fried breakfast, a McDonald's lunch, and a steak dinner. That's also about 37 grams of fat. That is creating emotion. It's not about numbers. All of a sudden I can see that it's really dumb or gross to eat that much saturated fat in one box of popcorn while watching a movie. So think the facts. All of the data around popcorn having saturated fat and the impact of saturated fat on your health are all they're all related to information and data. That communication makes people feel that 3 junk meals in one day is dumb or it's gross. And the do that they're trying to create is when people are about to buy the popcorn, think about all that fat, feel a bit sick or feel a bit scared, buy something else. So it's a really clear process. It's a story in a moment. It also has what I call robust simplification. So I present something to my client presents it to her colleague, she presents it to her colleague, and so on. How much is that message going to become diluted? We want robust simplification. So when the message is passed on, it means roughly the same thing. So it's about double your daily fat allowance, or it's a day's worth of unhealthy food. That's really robust simplification. We can also look at what was left out. One of the most important things in communication is to leave out unnecessary stuff. So in this case, they didn't talk about the salt and the sugar that are in popcorn. Those are important factors, but if you talk about 3 problems, you're diluting the message. They didn't talk about a large bag of popcorn. It wouldn't have made the message any stronger. They didn't talk about the other things we often eat in cinemas and movie theatres, the hot dogs, the ice creams. They're also bad, but again, it would dilute the message. They didn't talk about other comparators, for example, a normal daily meal. So all of these things together mean that we can leverage the information to find the do, and then we look around and we identify methods of conveying the emotion so that we cause the do to be more likely to happen. So what about the structure of this sort of presentation in the market research world? We might do something like the tabletop display with the popcorn and the 3 meals, but probably not. It's probably going to be a presentation or a report. The most important thing about storytelling is that actually it's about narrative flow. It has a beginning and a middle and an end. And the flow should be linear. It shouldn't be one of those modern novels that goes all over the place and that's hard to follow. People are busy. They want to get to the key information. You do want to use storytelling devices, humour, personal anecdotes, interactions, gamification to enhance the flow. So what are the key elements? it's got to link to the project objectives. We've got to be talking about the things that are of interest to the organisation. We want to focus on things that they need to know, not nice to know. The nice to knows can sometimes have a role if they help the flow. That's probably the only case where you would put them in the presentation. We want to see that they're supported by patterns or themes in the data. We don't want to pull out single data points. We want clear findings to ensure we're talking about large groups of people. Ideally, when we talk about groups of people, we're hoping to create majorities. Now, for example, maybe we've done some analysis at the think stage and we find that men are slightly more interested in this new product. Young people are slightly more interested in this new product. And people in London are slightly more interested. Well, let's look at the analysis for young men in London, because that may be the whole message, and that actually may take us into much larger, much clearer findings. Normally, if we're thinking about structure, we should not present the data in the order it was asked. So we don't want to see question 1 presented followed by question 2 presented followed by question 3 presented. And when we are presenting the information from, say, question 3, we don't want to see the scales or the items or the attributes presented in the order they were on the questionnaire. In terms of the questionnaire, they were presented in that order to give a narrative flow to the data collection process. But that is not the storytelling process. So here's a simple example. Here is some data that I've downloaded recently about deaths and cases per million of population from several countries. And when I downloaded this data from the Worldometer site, it was in alphabetical order. And if we look at that, the solid bars are deaths per million, and the red line is cases per million, and on the right hand side we've got the world score. So all the relevant information is there, but it's very hard to know what is the story. So I could use this to look things up, but it's not really helpful. If I'm telling a story, then I want to do something like this. I have decided that I'm going to sort the data by deaths per million. So we have Brazil, USA, UK on the left hand side, very high numbers. Coming all the way down, very low numbers at the moment, comparatively, for Germany, India, Japan and China. And if we look then at the cases per million line, we can see that in some countries there is a close link between the number of cases and the number of deaths. These are presumably countries that do a standard amount of testing, because on the world point there is a very close link. And then we get countries like UK, Italy, where there are far fewer cases identified than deaths, suggests maybe there is much less testing going on. So this now becomes a much better tool for talking about storytelling. You should always be sorting your information by something. The something is determined by the story you're telling, and the story you are telling is determined by the do that you want to cause to happen. Now, big shout out here to Mike Sherman, who has been advocating this structure for a long time. It's based on the pyramid principle, a book by Barbara Minto, and a lot of McKinsey's background. So this is a typical structure, and what I would suggest is using this as your default. Sometimes clients will say, no, I don't want that. Well, that's fine. They're clients. They get to have that say. But I would always suggest using this as your starting point. So start off, initial slide or initial statement or initial part of the report, the lead, the elevator pitch. What is the short message that tells people why they should bother looking at the rest of the information and what the key finding is? And then we want an executive summary. And in the executive summary, list 3 themes and list the do that you want people to do afterwards. 3 is in many ways a magic number for Western audiences in particular. We expect things to come in 3s. If you watch people talking to each other, when one speaker reaches the third item, the second one is leaning forward and getting ready to join in the contribution into the conversation with their contribution. Threes are really deeply embedded, so we should try to use them whenever possible. And then we talk about theme 1, and we provide 3 pieces of evidence. You may have 20 pieces of evidence. That will not be more convincing than 3. And in fact, I'm going to talk a bit more about how you organize those 3. Each one of those should be enough and appeal to a slightly different sort of person in the audience. Then you're going to talk about theme 2 with 3 pieces of evidence. You're going to talk about theme 3 with 3 pieces of evidence. Summarize that with the do, and you're at about 20 slides. Now, it will tend to grow in the real world, but that is a good default starting position. And then everything else goes into the appendix, or perhaps we should call it the treasure chest, because that's often where all the ongoing good stuff will be. So we shouldn't call it a dumping ground. We should really make sure that people value the treasure chest. So 3 pieces of evidence. Focus on contrast, not repetition. We don't want 3 pieces of evidence that are actually relatively similar. We ask these 3 quite similar questions and we got these quite similar responses. Different people learn in different ways. So we might want 1 piece of evidence that's very quantitative. 75% of people said this. 1 piece of evidence that's very qualitative. The emotional drivers that were linked to this were. And then we might want a video or some open-ended comments or some advanced analytics, some conjoint modeling, and that would be our 3rd piece of evidence. So we're appealing to quite different audiences with our different pieces of information. I mentioned the lead, and this is perhaps one of the best descriptions of how we identify what the lead is. This is from Nora Ephron, who was a screenwriter, but before that she was a journalist. She grew up in Beverly Hills. She went to the Beverly Hills School of Journalism, and on the first day she used to tell this story about how she was taught about the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where and why. And they were also taught about the lead. Now, in a newspaper, the lead is the bit that's in heavy print that tells you why you want to read the rest of this report. Online, it's more like the clickbait. This is the piece that really catches your eye, that makes you go in. And this is what you need right at the beginning of the presentation. You want it in the mailing invitation that goes asking people to attend the debrief. So they were asked to write the lead for the school newspaper for this story. So the story was, the entire school faculty will travel to Sacramento next Thursday for a colloquium in new teaching methods. Among the speakers will be anthropologist Margaret Mead, college president Dr. Robert Maynard Hutchins, and California Governor Edmund Brown. And all the students typed away, and they wrote about the 5 W's, and the teacher went down the class looking at what they'd written. He said, yes, good but not right, good but not right. So what was the lead? Well, remember, this was the lead for the school newspaper. So the lead is, no school next Thursday. That is why the school students would want to read this article. All the teaching faculty are going to be away next Thursday, and that means no school next Thursday. Sometimes the lead isn't in the story, it's of the story. This is one of my favourite diagrams. I've had it a long time now. I've forgotten quite who gave it to me. I'm sorry about that. But it's the difference between truth and precision. We want to be in the business of truth. We don't want to be sweating the detail to get the precision more and more correct. We have to know we're right. We're still going to do high quality research. But it's about the implications. We want this person to move. We don't want them to be fully informed about the weight and the speed of the object that's about to kill them. I mentioned the appendix, and it should be a treasure chest, and there's more we can do to make the appendix valuable. Explain that it's a treasure chest, not a garbage dump. Make the information easier to find. It's going to be a mix of tables, notes and visuals, and this is where a lot of the modern interrogation systems are coming in. It doesn't have to be one document, it doesn't have to be in one place, but it needs to be one concept. A single lookup system accessing all of the parts is what you're looking for. Remember storyboarding. You should be able to describe your presentation in just one or two easy pictures. Try sketching them out as cartoons, or just write down with a pen your simple core ideas at each stage. So I've mentioned feelings, I've mentioned emotions, so let's just focus on those for a moment. First of all, there's a really weak link between how you found the story and tell the story. You may have spent 2 weeks doing some advanced conjoint analysis. You would love to tell the client how clever you are. They're not interested. They want to be convinced that your recommendation is the right recommendation. So we may have multiple data sources. We've used lots of analytical tools, maybe predictive analytics. But actually, the best way to tell the story doesn't rest on the best data. It might be an image. It might be a consumer video talking about how they responded to this product. Don't think the way you tell the story has to be linked to the way you found the story. So here's a simple example. Maybe we've done a project and we want to go back to the client to say, the research shows we make too many mistakes. Now, as it happens, I learned this from the data by looking at the reports and all the pieces. But maybe I want to use this picture from their campus to show that this is how the problem happens. So that is much more powerful. It's not going to be useful in finding the story, but it can be useful in telling the story. Analogies are a powerful way of getting a complex message across. So here's one analogy I quite like. Explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You understand it better, but the frog dies in the process. When they pitched the film Alien, they said it's like Jaws in space. It just cuts right through to the essence. This is one that was very popular a couple of years ago. AI and big data is like high school sex. Everybody's talking about it, but nobody is actually doing it. Again, what we're doing is we're cutting through to the essence of the message. They might have data behind that which talks about number of projects started, number of projects completed, return on investment and so on. And all of that is really useful think. But it doesn't make you feel like that information is relevant to you. This is a great one for the World Wildlife Fund. Taking one thing away from this Jenga causes the whole system to collapse. Just gets the message across nice and clearly. Memes are a great idea. Can you turn your research finding, your lead, your main proposition into a meme? Because this is how information travels. One of the things I would certainly say is try to start collecting images. Collect image online. This is quite a famous one online showing, and it can be used for all sorts of things. If you want to show the difference between design and practice, this sort of picture is really useful. But I collect lots and lots of photos. I've got my smartphone with me all the time, and if I see something that's a little bit quirky, like this one in Auckland, I say, right, that's going to be useful when I want to talk about conflicting messages, and I will just put it away into my collection, my treasure chest of information. So, what is the story from today's presentation? It's all about the do. The only reason we do a presentation is to change beliefs, to change feelings, to cause action. We use the think to find the do because we're researchers. That is what we do. And we use feel to cause the do. Structure your presentation to deliver the do. So start with the lead, then go to the story and have the recommendation. But the recommendation is going to be in the lead. It's going to be evident in the story. We have this saying that tell them what you're going to tell them. That's the lead. Tell them it. That's the story. tell them what you told them. That is the recommendation. It's not saying the same thing 3 times. It's a complementary combination of bringing that information together. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.